And Emma Geoghegan is an architect with Meme Architect and also a lecturer in the Dublin School of Architecture with DIT. And Emma has been involved in Nimble Spaces since the beginning, has done a lot of research, written a really important paper that kind of puts the sort of regulatory and what Trish was talking about, the contractual idea of supported living into a really important national perspective. So that's going to be hopefully published at a later stage of Nimble Spaces. But yeah, we've just been really delighted that Emma has helped us along the last 2 years of the process, and she's going to introduce the Enabling Space co-production panel.
Thanks, Rosie. I'm delighted to be here today and delighted to introduce this panel, who I'm very excited to hear speak. There's a kind of a range of different diverse approaches that the panel members are going to describe to you today. But I think what the key thing that I suppose pulls them all together is what does participation and collaboration truly mean in the design process, and how can we get a range of diverse voices and give them real agency and involvement in delivering changes and new ideas for our built environment. So first up we have Susanne Hofmann, who's come from Berlin. And Susanne is an architect and a professor at the Technical University in Berlin, and will soon be joining Sheffield University as a visiting professor. She's director of a practice called Die Baupiloten, and she's been involved in architecture and design and participatory design processes since 2002. And she recently published a book with an amazing suite of tools and methodologies for participatory processes called Architecture is Participation. So I'd like to introduce you to Susanne.
Emma, thank you very much for your kind introduction, and I'm extremely honored to be here to discuss our ideas about Nimble Space. So we try to involve the people and enable them to be part of the design process, as here in a project of student housing. So we every time we develop games which enable the people to be part of it, make decisions, because we all know you can't really assume that an architect layman can read plans or section, our favorite architectural tool, of course. So this was the game we conceived 2007 for student housing project, which you see here on top, the before and after situation. And it was, for example, extremely important for the students to have commons places, to have spaces where they can communicate inside and also in the outside space, which before, as you see in the picture, was just vast green land. And now we have, for example, a free space living room. And at the same time, we do refurbish the whole buildings. But now I want to talk briefly about one project, which is the elderly housing in the country. It's a rural context, obviously, and we were asked to do multi-generational housing in this amazing idyllic village of Dödlingen in northern Germany. That was the vision, mixed generation co-housing. And our proposal was that you have in the middle kind of a, I wouldn't call it really community center. It's not that formal, but it was a building where there should be possibilities, also nursery and a community kitchen and places where you can be creative or give courses, teach things or learn bits and pieces you're interested in. And the diagram somehow should show the exchange with the municipality, and at the same time it shows the different grades of privateness around this common communal building. They are kind of courtyards surrounded again with living units. To get, I mean, we kind of have the big architectural concept, how the structure might work, but then we are really interested, how do these people want to live? And very often we work together with kind of building families, we call it Baufamilie in German, and we are putting together a few tools where we think, how to get the user knowledge, the desire and their needs. And this is bits and glimpses of different workshops. We do try to acquire the soft but also the hard facts. So we ask really hard, objective questions about which kind of shared spaces they would like to, how many percentage of family they think should be good or seniors, just to get the first ideas out. But this is just a tiny start. We have a tool, for example, Atmosphere, as a means of communication, where we have kind of collages here with bits and pieces prepared with different atmospheric qualities, which the users and other interested in the group, because these groups are quite complex, put together. And here, for example, an atmospheric mosaic where they explore the atmosphere, but they can't immediately tell, yes, that's how I want to live. But with a mosaic, they try to put together a first feeling, glimpse of how they would like to live. And here, this was one which became extremely important in the group. They were all consensus that the site, the woodlands, is extremely important to them. They want to keep it. It should be very much an outdoor common space where their little housing modules will sit in. And we devised, for example, also this game, this negotiation dream game, where this is one group. There are several groups which have their own exploration. Here they start to think first about their private space. How do I want to live? And they get a collection of housing attributes. We always work with activities they actually want to do in the space, like meditate or bathe or whatsoever. And they have atmospheric qualities which they try to define these activities with. And in a third round, or in the second round, they would have to negotiate. Okay, that's my dream of my private space, but how does it go with yours? How can we share? How can I maybe minimize my own space to have more common space together? Where are our common resources? And so on. And this is part of this building family group. This particular group was of 12 to 15 people on the whole. And out of the results of the game, we developed different images, collages, how the space could be experienced, could be built. Like here, view from a cozy bed towards the forest. It was extremely important to think about how would people age there. They want to live there as an elderly person. Creative workspace was important for them. The cooking together. And of course, it had to be a great retreat. We developed from there a space catalog of all these 4 different types, which I just showed you. The creative, communicative kitchen type, and so on. And we had a catalog of space of different sizes, which in the next game they had to combine with reference projects where we show the atmosphere. And of course, we were sitting together, and the cost frame was extremely important in this very moment, because when we do participatory projects, you can't just gather a list of desires, but you have to negotiate how much money, how much space can I actually afford. And we developed housing types like the Soul Compact, and I don't get into it more. It's a family type, it's a pair compact type, and it's about senior living together housing type. And so we developed for that site 4 Soul Compact, 8 Pair Compact, and so on, and combined it on the side, always around courtyard. We put models which could be differently put together. There were actually 4 modules which can be put together in different ways to build, again, a certain housing type on on that housing type. So to be together, celebrate, and here one view of this little, one of these little courtyards with some of the housing around. And Emma mentioned the book Architecture as Participation. So we tried and we developed quite a few tools and put them together and show how architecture can be made out of it. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so we met Shane in 2012 when we first came to Callan, and since then we've got to know him and other locals and residents in Camphill and Callan. And through that experience, through getting to know people and through our early initial workshops in the Nimble Spaces project, I guess we identified that one of the, everybody was so different in their requirements and their aspirations, but the one thing that they have in common is that they want some aspect of shared living, but it's very varying degrees of shared living, and this is what we wanted to explore. And we wanted to use the idea of a game, which Susanne has talked about, because a game allows people to, it kind of frees you up from the limitations of thinking about a building, and you're just thinking about patterns of activity. And also, it can be fun. You don't have to take it too seriously. So for that reason, I think it can be very revealing. So we've used a game before. This was a project in 2010 in Belfast, in Woodvale Park in Belfast, where we played the game with, it was a community group, and we linked it to a spreadsheet with costs. Again, Susanne talked about this importance of linking it to costs, and so people were able to prioritize what they wanted. And again, we had this, they had sort of come to us with thinking they needed a building, but in the end, it turned out that it was more of it became more of a program surface, a path, if you like. And this process, which was a very sort of exciting process of co-production, allowed us to develop a design, but then also a strategy for the step-by-step implementation of that design, because we knew what the priorities of people were. And then, as Shane is describing, our board in Callan was it looked like this, and it had the shared space. It was the very yellow space in the middle, and then it sort of graduated out to the greyer spaces on the outside, which are the private areas. And so players were given 10 pieces. The different colours represent the different players. And players were given 10 pieces. So we have sleeping, living, computer, studying, cooking, eating, WC, bathing, storage, outdoor relaxing, and garden area. And then each player would place on the board according to how they saw that activity for themselves, whether it was a very shared activity or a very private activity, or in between. So we played the game the first time, 8 players, and you can see the levels of enthusiasm that it generated. And then this is the sort of configuration of how the pieces looked at the end of the game. And then we took that and analysed it player per player. And you can see outlined in grey is the private clusters, and outlined in yellow is the grey clusters. So that starts to give you a picture of individuals' requirements in terms of their shared and private. And it's really just a pattern of activity. So, for example, let's say with this player, they saw eating as a very shared space, a shared activity, and then, for example, like indoor relaxing, and a garden as a more private activity, which was unexpected. We also use the game to explore a particular site, in this case, West Court in Callan. And we drew on the board the main features of the site, so the walled garden and the mound covering West Court House. And this also gave the board an orientation, north-south, east-west. And so again, players so then players laid their pieces down according to private shared, but also in relation to the features of the site. So that created more diversity within the game. And we analysed this as per round. So you can see how it's quite instructive to see that the one player might start a shared cluster and then others join. That's how it builds up over the game. And again, we analysed this player per player. So you can see, for example, this player liked the idea of being part of the shared garden, and also liked the idea of being part of a shared workspace here in the centre, which was an interesting thing that emerged from this round of the game, a shared workspace with shared facilities. And also they liked the idea of a shared outdoor relaxing area, but with a vantage point up on the mound. So that sort of individual analysis. And then looking at more at a cluster analysis, you can see that the yellow areas then are the shared areas. So in the centre, a shared space dominated by cooking and eating, and then this working shared space, and then the gardening in the walled garden. So those are it's a bit more nuanced once you introduce the idea of an actual site. And we used the game for individual consultations. So Shane, we talked to you about this, about figuring out your current, or showing on the board your current living conditions or your current living situation. And you have a very busy weekly schedule, don't you, with all these activities. This is your chart from your room with all your activities for the week. And then you laid down the pieces to describe your current living arrangement. Oh. Uh-oh. So I'm afraid there's a few slides missing there, but I guess one of the things that came out of that description of your existing living situation and then your aspirations was that you liked the idea of being closer to a garden and having your outdoor relaxing area, but also your work area closer to the garden, because at the moment you have to travel quite far to a garden. So we did have that as an image, but I don't know if do you remember figuring that out with us?
Semi-shared, semi-private.
Yes, yeah. That something wouldn't necessarily have to be just all communal. That it would be have degrees of privacy. You could be on the threshold. Your outdoor relaxing area could be on the threshold of a more shared space.
Hello, I'm Jay. Thank you for inviting me. We've been working with the Nimble Spaces for past 2 years. I've been coming to Ireland very often. It almost feels like my third home. So we do a variety of stuff, but I'm not going to go into it. So one of the big part for us, well, actually, when you communicate people, co-production itself is quite an interesting idea, but we all do things together regardless how we categorize it. And the stakeholder level is from the clients to users to general publics to design team to politicians. You can categorize loads of different people. But often when we start a project, we're just like, rather than glove on, put the gloves on, let's make some stuff and then see what happens. And we found it quite an interesting model to actually really galvanize together as widest the audience we can reach. I put it into a few different, three different categories. The first, making the with design team, since I have a very short amount of time. Now I've given 5 minutes. This is a project we did for Colloquial Design Week. We just got given this fiber cement panels, and we're like, okay, we have got this material, but we don't really have money to make a frame for it. So what do we do? So me and my a structural engineer went to the pub, obviously. So we drank, and so what are we going to do? Okay. Oh, okay, so we can use this material as the structure itself. Oh, but there's no data on it. What are we going to do? Actually, let's just test it, let's break it, and then see what we can do with it. So that was really it. And then we just got together, we broke some stuff, and this was built, all structural. Next, we work with the craft people quite a lot. I like working with the people who know what they're doing, and it's an amazing thing when the people do things with their hands without really thinking. I think they just somehow have a capacity in their brain, well, in their hand is brain. So this was a tiny little site in City of London, has not been developed since the Great Fire, which is 1666, which is a quite rare thing. So we somehow convinced a City of London to let us go wild with a historic carving student. So we just designed a quite simple system, and we worked with them for 6 months, just let them carve away. And these things happened. Lots of political comments. City of London's were okay with it. There are a few things censored out, but not so much. But the process itself, we had a lot of politicians and officers coming down to the carving environment, and they're having a go at it. They're not all perfect because it's done by students and some professionals and some by our Studio Weave team. But it's putting everyone together to make a new public space in City of London. We learned quite a lot from that. Making it a community. This is quite a lot of part that we do. Now we try to convince clients at the beginning, just put just a tiny bit amount of money and let's just make stuff and then see what happens. We run a workshop with students and makers called Student in the Woods. This is a 3 days design while you make. We do make rather substantial things within 3 days, starting from just timber log, but it really, really teaches you that your hands can think. We just done this structure in the Milton Keynes, a part of the wider strategic work that we're doing. This was built in 4 days, 2 weekends, with age between 7 till 21, I guess. And all the family came together and things were, I wouldn't say botched together. This was a slightly more designed, but it had to be designed so 12 adults can lift this thing because we didn't get planning permission. All those things that we bypass. Anyway, it's all about making, all about coming together, talking, find out what each other's good at, and be quick and stop thinking. Same. This was slightly larger. This was a professional involved in terms of framework and things, but we're making a little community facility down in Dartford, southeast of side of London in Kent. This was entirely hand-painted building with all the communities got together, all the school students that we've spoken to make this project happen. It's quite a long story, but I'm just shortening it out as much. Our next endeavour is a slightly larger. We're working with a school in West London, in Ealing. We're trying to build this with 2 master carpenters and the students who have intellectual disability. So, yeah, hopefully it'll be there next summer. Thank you.
I'm going to be talking about how a dancer gets kind of involved with design and how dance and creative movement. I'm going to actually qualify it as creative movement can contribute to design, and looking particularly at the work we did with Nimble Spaces. So, spatio-temporal form interweaved of time, space, and successive events within could just as easily describe choreography as it does their architecture. So with a similar focus on structuring space and time, and also manipulating movement. It feels really quite naughty to be in visual and with a lot of visual artists and architects in the audience, and to start arguing against the importance of the visual. But architecture, as we know, is also about all the other senses, and that's something that dance can help. So if I read this bit quickly, we experience architecture with our whole being. The feeling of light on our skin, the isolation of being in a large space alone, the texture of the floor surface, the warmth of the space and the smell of new timber, the muffled sound of a small carpeted space, or the echoes in a large hard surfaced room. The way in which these experiences combine is fundamental to the way that we feel about our architecture and our relationship with it. And that is also something that is fundamental in how we research creative movement. So architecture is also made by its use. So we design it, and then it is also again redesigned through its use. So in the, let me see if I can get this right. Yeah. So in the Nimble Spaces project, we were looking very specifically on use of space. And before I get to that, I thought I'd actually just show you an example of when a choreographer and an architect work together in design. So first of all, this quote, "Architecture choreographs movement," sorry, from PC to Mac, there was a bit of a war. And Mac won. So this one, "Architecture choreographs movement," is a quote from David Rockwell. And he was commissioned to work on the interior of the new JetBlue terminal in JFK, and he employed a Broadway choreographer, Jerry Mitchell, to work with him on it. And the task for it was to use movement to personalise the experience and deal with the emotions of travel. Or more bluntly, the JetBlue executive said that he wanted the people moving through the terminal to feel sexy. So, David Rockwell and Jerry Mitchell work in a more traditional relationship on Broadway musicals, but he invited Jerry Mitchell in because one thing a choreographer really knows what to do is how to move large volumes of people smoothly, gracefully through space. So the Jerry pointed out that there was different emotional responses to arriving and departing. And also that when looking at it, when they looked at the flow stimulation, the simulation, the architects were considering cross paths. It's a no-no in choreography. It's very difficult. As we all know, trying to cross a road, especially in Ireland. People move easier in circles. So the design that we have here is actually where very subtly people's movement is choreographed by creating a large hall, two large obstacles. People flow around obstacles like they do with water. Through in the middle, direct, you've arrived, you just want to get home. When you're departing, you dawdle a little bit, you move more in circles, which then also funnels you closer to the shops. And also what's interesting as well is that a curved pathway slows time. So when we're moving slowly, we have a greater sense of that luxury of time. We dawdle, we shop. So this was a very concrete example of design through dance. But what we were looking at here is using creative movement and physical improvisation as a means of exploring and understanding our use of space. So dance tools can be used as an explorative pedagogy. And it's also a means of articulating our space and place relationships, and I deliberately separate them, and the values that we might not actually realise that we have about them and our needs. And these are independent of verbal language, so they're very useful for us in this group. They're also, oh yeah, sorry, I was going to press this. I'm desperately trying to look as good as the designers by having like visual stuff. So in the background. So the other thing is with it is that movement can also be very subversive. Can you put the sound down on that? Ah! Hang on. Look at that. on my own. So movement can be terribly subversive as well. And returning to what Rory and Tricia were talking about this morning, is that we do have a crisis here about who gets to say what about the space that they live in Ireland. And this is an example of where you can use movement to get people to... well, we got to go to places that we weren't allowed. We were in around the Docklands area where everything is circumscribed by the Yellow Jackets, and create a dance film that is revaluing the Dublin inner city for its residences, where it's saying that a place is also a place full of memory. It's a place where I lived in. It has different qualities to it that we simply just can't put a euro sign on. That is a very quick way of defining that. Also, just giving this as an example of where you can use movement to embody processes and model. God, that's quick. Model actions that maybe when we're talking about things, when we're reading, we don't necessarily get them. So that was very quick. That was working with landscape architect students in Malmö who had to work on a design project on designing for sea level rising in a town where they just don't really want to know about it. So the architects and the planners have been talking to Geoghegan for a while, saying, you know what, I'd move if I were you. And they're not listening because the land values are too high. So we created this work which showed where the high water line was, and the students in the trees are the jetsam and flotsam, and at the end of that there was this really intense conversation between the townspeople and the municipality about what could possibly be done. So dance can work very well in opening people's eyes. Where we go? Okay, so with Nimble Spaces, again, I'll just have this on in the background, just so, there we go, so because this is upstairs as well. But what we were focusing on here was on in our process we were looking on the users of design. So we were working together, the people who will actually be living in places. So how can dance help a user of design better articulate what they need? And first of all, obviously, we need to understand our relationship with our space, what different spaces we have, how do we use them, and also very importantly as well as how different bodies use space differently. How do we move differently through it? And we looked as well about at understanding our spheres of action, from personal to shared to universal spaces. So picking up on what Deirdre and Dougal were doing, but on a very different kind of methodology, I suppose you could say. And also having a sensory exploration of our environment. I'm going to just skip that. So there isn't much done yet with dance in design, and I think there is a lot of potential in it if it's used kind of as a research tool. And very quickly, what it can do is it can enable people to engage. Because an embodied experience is an extremely powerful tool. Once you embody something, you have usually there's a much greater understanding. Again, with the landscape architect students, they couldn't understand cross-shore currents. So I made them dance cross-shore currents on a frozen beach in Sweden in February, and boy, did they get after that. But then what happened is then when they were talking to the coastal engineer, the depth of their inquiry was much greater. So it helps with enabling people to engage in design, but also it does on both sides, the designer and the designed for. It sensitizes. There's enough neuroscientific research done now on dance, which shows that creative movement and creative improvisation, it builds up a huge level of empathy and relationality between us. You literally step into somebody else's body when you dance with them. And that is an extraordinary tool for a designer to have. You know, it's something that's very difficult for us. So it builds up our sensitivity, our empathizers, and it also stimulates the lady with the goose on her head. This is, well, as a performer, I think play is very serious. And this is what it can do then is it can explode out possible potential other ways of thinking. It prepares for dialogue and it prepares for design, and that is 7 minutes and 30 seconds. Yeah.
But I want to thank all the panelists for sharing their projects. And I suppose this panel in particular is very close to our hearts in Nimble Spaces because it also has been the process and activities of what we've been doing in Nimble Spaces over the last 2 years. And just, I think, Callan has been incredibly enriched by having Jay and Ríonach and Emma and Lyd visit over the last 2 years. Also, Rona and Jenny are involved. Rona's work is upstairs in the process space, and Jenny is cooking for us for lunch. So their involvement is coming in other ways. But I just want to say that we have put a lot of emphasis on documenting Nimble Spaces. We have 4 wonderful films that Eamon Little has made. They're going to be online. 2 of them are online at the moment. They're all going to be online. And it is a real resource that we want people to look, learn and share. And we want the Nimble Spaces process to extend way beyond Callan and Kilkenny. And hopefully planners, architects, communities, people will take on some of the really fantastic processes that the panel have talked about today.